Hey guys, welcome back to Life of Bliss. What you see behind me are three beautiful, well, almost beautiful boxes from GSG Audio. They're Evolution Series enclosures that I need to prep before painting, and that is what today's video is all about. They are beautiful, but they are a little rough around the edges. They've got nail holes. They've got a little bit of raised edges. They need to be cleaned up before we can apply some finish to them. So, like I said, that's what the video is about today. Let's go ahead and dive in on what tools I'll be using. So to finish off these boxes, I'm going to be finishing them with some Raptor bed liner. This can also be coated with Duratex for the process I'm going to be using. If you're going to be looking for like a high gloss finish or an automotive type finish, you're going to need to do a little bit more work than what I'm going to be doing. Mine's going to have some texture, so it's going to hide a little bit of imperfections, but we still need these pretty darn smooth to give them a good look. So first to start off with, we've got some wood glue, which we are going to mix with water in a 50-50 ratio and either brush or roll this on some of these edges. So all of these exposed edges, the butt joints, the end joints, have this rough MDF end grain, and we need to fill that in with something that's going to absorb into that wood and stop the paint or finishing material from absorbing in there. So we need something to seal that off, and wood glue and water is a great way to do that. It's cheap. You're gonna have wood glue already from putting these together. So that is what I'm gonna be doing. So I'll go over that process. We'll also need some sort of sander, either an orbital sander or DA sander. You can either use air or electricity for these. I've got some 80 grit and 220 grit paper that I'm going to be using, and that should really be enough for the finish that I'm going to be applying on there, like I mentioned. So be sure to have some way to sand, and then also to fill in little nail holes and little cracks along the edges, you'll need some drywall spackle. Now, this is not structural. People look at this and say this is going to crack, this is going to look terrible. This is not something that's going to be holding any sort of shape besides filling in tiny pinholes, or maybe there's a little bit of a hairline gap up here on one of these beveled edges that you need to fill in. Just something to where there's not a noticeable crack, and then your coating going over that is going to be plenty strong to cover that area and hold together. So I've done this many times with many enclosures over the years. I've never had cracking issues where that stuff's applied. So if you do have large areas, large voids, I would say anything 1/16 of an inch or bigger that you're going to be filling in, you might want to use some body putty or some Bondo, something like that to fill that in. But for those hairline cracks and any pinholes from the nail gun, that spackle is going to work just fine. So I'm going to start off, give these a quick rough sand down before I start applying that water and glue. So I'll take you guys through the process. And if you guys are interested in the full build series on these GSG Evolution boxes, I'll leave a link down below to this series on my YouTube channel. And while you're at it, be sure to check out GSG's website. They have a ton of options for subwoofer enclosures, including several new behind the screen series that they've added this past month, going from a single 15-inch driver all the way up to a dual 24-inch enclosure. This first step is something that's optional, but I'm going to be filling in the holes on the front side of the baffle that was used to align the front baffle. For this, I'm going to be using some body putty or Bondo, mixing it as the directions tell you to, and then this first coat is just to fill in that hole. We'll be going over it here in a little bit to give it a nice smooth look after that first coat dries. And while you're moving these, be sure to be careful and either have a friend help you or use a furniture dolly. These are extremely heavy, 200 to 300 pounds a piece without drivers. So just be careful, don't hurt your back, be smart about it. And here's that second coat that I was talking about. I'm going to be leaving enough material on there to be able to smooth it down later, sand it down, and get it completely flush with that front baffle. Next, we have all of these nail holes from the Brad nail gun all around the box. These all need to be filled in or else you will see them through the paint. So we're going to be using some spackle, as you see here. And while we're at it, we're going to be looking at all of these edges and sanding all those down and using either some spackle or body putty, if need be, to fill those gaps in. But as you can see here, even the CNC edges are not 100% smooth. It's time to bust out the DA sander, and one thing you'll notice with this video, there is a lot of sanding involved. I tried the first box with 80 grit sandpaper on the electric sander that I had. That took forever, so I busted out the Air DA sander and threw some 36 grit sandpaper on it. That cut a lot faster, but it still took a ton of sanding to get everything down smooth how I wanted it. Now you could go fill a lot of these spots with Bondo and then sand it down, but I really wasn't wanting to use a lot of Bondo on this box. I was wanting to sand down the wood material, so that's a route that I went. And as you can see, I'm keeping that DA extremely flat, not getting up on the edge and moving it around as much as possible. That's going to ensure that I have a nice, flat, smooth surface when it comes time to paint, and I'm not sitting up on the edge creating divots in the wood or low spots that you will be able to see later on. And don't be afraid to run your hand across the box there and feel everything, because that's going to give you the best representation of how smooth it is, not by looking at it. And also, don't worry about going back with a smoother sandpaper at this point. We'll be doing that later on. Now next we're going to be taking care of those nail holes that I was talking about. For this you're going to be using just regular drywall spackle. This stuff is great for these because it's quick drying, easy to use, doesn't make a huge mess. Goes on pink, dries white, so you know when it's dry. But you're just going to take your knife, push it into those holes, and then scrape away the excess. So there's going to be, if you're anything like me, there's going to be a lot of holes in your box. So just take your time, go over everything, make sure you're hitting all of the holes, because again, you will see those holes in your paint if you don't get them covered. Now throughout this process, be sure you're staying hydrated. My drink of choice? Liquid Death. A cool, refreshing, sparkling water that's non-alcoholic and has just enough flavor to make your taste buds tingle with joy as you tackle your prep job in the heat. I'm not sponsored by Liquid Death in any way, but I'd sure like to be. So Liquid Death, call me. Now after all the spackle is dried, I'm going over everything with 220 grit sandpaper with my orbital sander, and I'm leaving just enough to cover up those holes and sanding off the rest of the excess on the surface. Alright, so taking a look at the progress so far, all of the nail holes are filled and all of the sides and end grain is sanded smooth. Looking pretty good so far, so the next step is going to be rounding off some of those edges. Now, I chose to just take 220 down the edges just to round them off a bit. Kind of gave it a little bit of an angled look still, but that just knocks down that sharp 90-degree edge. Here's where all the magic happens in the painting process with the end grain, and that's when you take a 50-50 mix of wood glue and water, mix it together. It's going to be pretty runny still, but you want that. We're going to mix that together and then start rolling it on all of the end grain. Now that water is going to soak into that wood just a little bit, but when it dries, it's going to leave that wood glue on the surface, which is going to seal all the wood. That's going to prevent any paint from soaking up into the wood and causing either a rougher look or a sheen that just doesn't look like the rest of the box. So that's really going to help even things out and just make it look more uniform and seal everything off whenever you're painting. So just going over every single edge. I'm going over it about 5 or 6 times. Oh, hey there, buddy. Going over it about 5 or 6 times to get a good buildup, and then we'll go back and sand it down later. And one area not to forget is the port area. That is all end grain as well, so give it a good covering and we'll sand it down later. Now to sand down all those spots on the front baffle smooth that I use the Bondo or body putty, I used some 80 grit sandpaper on my orbital sander for the first pass. This is a rough cut just to get them down fairly close to flat and smooth, and then I came back later with some 220 grit sandpaper to finish that off to make sure they were completely smooth. And continuing with the 220 paper on the orbital sander, I went over all of the end grain that I used that wood glue mix on. Now, depending on what sort of finish you're doing and how smooth you're looking for it to be, this is an optional step. As you'll see in my next video when doing the Raptor liner and doing the rougher texture, I don't think this is absolutely necessary, but if you're going for a smoother look, I would definitely go over all this with some 220 paper. And here you can get a little glimpse of how well that wood glue mix worked, and after sanding it, it was extremely smooth. I was really happy with how it sealed everything up and how smooth it was. So definitely probably one of the best ways to prep the end grain for MDF. And really the rest of the box turned out super smooth. It's just a lot of sanding, so just be prepared for that. So there we go, guys, a fully prepped and ready to paint cabinet here. Now this is prepped, ready to go for something like this Raptor liner that I'm going to be using, or Duratex, whether you be rolling it on or spraying it on. I'm going to be spraying it, so I'll be showing you how to do that in the next video. But if you were going to go a step further and paint this like auto body colors, or a really nice flat black paint that you want super smooth like a vehicle, there's going to be a little bit more prep work involved. You're going to want to make sure absolutely all of these seams are 100% smooth. You want to go over it with some high build primer, sand that a few times, and really get this as smooth as glass before you move on to that next step. And to be 100% honest, you really won't want to be using one of these circular DAs like I've been using. You'd rather use a longer flat one, because you might notice some circle grooves or some circle marks in the finish if you're going to be doing a high gloss finish like that. So something else to keep in mind if you're going for that finish. Wood glue and water mix really smooth things out. It feels just like the face of the board on this end grain here. You can't really feel those seams at all, so that did a great job sealing everything up and filling everything in. And these front holes with that Bondo or that body putty, that made it super smooth and flat. For something that big, I would not use that spackle that you'd use on drywall. Those are only for those little nail holes or those pin holes. You need something a little bit stronger to fill up that big of a gap. So I really hope this video helped you guys out in getting your boxes prepped for whatever finish you're looking to do. Now the next video I'm going to be showing you how I apply that Raptor liner, and I'm going to either be using the gun that they supply or an HVLP gun that I normally use. I'll bring you guys along the way, but I'll do some test panels, show you what each look like, and then go ahead and get all the boxes finished. But for now, I've got one more box to prep before I can paint, so I'm going to get that going. I appreciate you guys watching Life of Bliss, and I will see you soon.